Rocky has a long history in aviation. Rocky ran his own bush outfit out of Churchill. I believe it was Norseman at the time, is that correct? Norseman, flying up the west coast of Hudson Bay, some of the toughest weather and some of the most difficult water conditions in the NWT. Here's Brock Parsons.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. There are two people I'm very envious of. We're about the same age, but Bob Ingalls and Willie Lazarich are still flying airplanes, and my wife has a tough time getting me out of bed in the morning. And so Bob and Willie Lazarich are like, in my day, the perennial comedian who is 39 years of age and never gets any older. So anyway, thank you very much, Bob. I spent a lot of years out of Churchill, and the IFR, I was told one time by an MOT inspector, is pretty ticked off with me, and he said some jokers around here say IFR means I follow Rocky, but he said, Parsons, he said, you have so many infractions. See, Churchill's the sort of place, if the world needed an enema, that's where they'd put the tube. So they said, Parsons, you have so many infractions down at the Department of Transport, called them that day in Winnipeg. He said, we have to burn the old files to make room for the new ones. So anyway, I see a lot of you don't have your hip waders on today, so I'll sort of skip aviation and talk a little bit about old age, what I'm more familiar with now. And I noticed that one thing I particularly noticed that the young pilots really don't associate with the older pilots. And I thought, well, I guess they look to the future and they don't like what they see. Bursitis, arthritis, and eye problems, that sort of thing. So, you know, you can't blame them. So, anyway, I was listening last night at one table. There was a couple of ladies talking about their husbands, and one said, you know, aren't you a little bit anxious about Charlie? He keeps chasing girls, and here he is, 85. And she said, well, no, not really. She said, dogs chase cars, but they can't drive. Anyway, at my age, I was feeling a little down and not feeling too well in Edmonton. I'd going around to see a doctor. They sort of fit me in. I have a son-in-law who's in the medical profession, so he brought me in to see this doctor. And I was sitting in a waiting room, and an old fellow, an elderly chap, came out. He was pretty upset, and he said, there's this... came out and he spoke to me. He said, geez, he said, I'm never going to come back here again. He said, there's this young whippersnapper of a doctor, and I told him I was having trouble going to urinating. And he said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 95. He said, well, you peed enough. So I said, I'm never coming back here again. He said, anyway, another time I was sitting down at one of the, visiting some grandchildren in the States. They're coming up here to visit this summer. I love Americans. I think they're wonderful people. And these gentlemen, they were around, seemed to be about 90 years of age, and they were sort of kidding back and forth. He said, you know, Charlie, he said, I can tell how old you are by the wrinkles on your behind. Ah, I said, you're full of malarkey, don't hand me that. He said, no, honestly, he said, I'll bet you $50. I can tell you your exact age. And so I said, looked around, no one was watching, so he dropped his drawers and he sort of looked at it and he said, you're 81. I said, Joe, he said, you're a genius, how could you tell? He said, you told me yesterday. But anyway, I know as I say, I like Americans, and I heard about a couple of Americans who had flown in World War II and were over in the UK, and they wanted to relive the old days where they had been flying, I believe it was their command pilots had been flying B-52s over Europe, and during just around the Battle of Britain days. And so they were young fellows full of beans in those days, and they were buddies all their lives, and just recent years they decided to go back and revisit some of the old haunts. And one was was a pub, I think it was called the Golden Horse or something like that. But anyway, they were sitting down there and they had a few beers and having a roaring good time and quite loud. And there's a couple of elderly English gentlemen listening in on them. These two Americans are having so much fun, they were eavesdropping. And so one said, "Do you remember that woman? I forget her name, but she had flaming red hair and she had a birthmark under her eye. And she had this wild laugh, and she could drink a quart of whiskey. She'd drink a quart of whiskey and then swing up in the chandeliers." And one of the gentlemen who was hard of hearing, notice I'm hearing here, he said, "What did he say? What did he say?" He said he knows Mother.